All right, so let's look at China. Let's look at Europe. Hey, guys. So China is one of the first societies to centralize. And when you centralize, you accumulate a lot of resources, and these resources allow you to make great inventions. And so the 4 great inventions of China are the compass, right? Paper, printmaking, and gunpowder. Okay, these are the 4 great inventions of China. China was the first to invent this by hundreds of years, okay? So the printing press in China was maybe about the year 800. In Europe, it would be 1400, okay? So this is like a huge advantage over Europe. But these 4 inventions did not really impact society in China. They had no impact on society. But in Europe, when they go over to Europe, the compass will bring in the age of exploration, right? It will allow Europe to conquer the entire world, the age of exploration, right? Paper and printmaking, what does it do? It creates universal literacy. Everyone in Europe is now able to read and write because of paper and printmaking. It radically transformed the entire fabric of European society. And because people are now able to read and write, it gives rise to the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, the Silent Revolution, okay? And the gunpowder allows Europe to conquer the entire world, conquest, okay? So think about that. China was the first to invent all 4, and Europe was able to take all 4 and radically transform the society and make Europe into the dominant power in the entire world, right? So then the question then is, why is it China didn't make use of these 4 inventions? Just look at paper and printmaking, okay? The problem in China is that you have these Confucian bureaucrats. And what is their source of power? It's the monopoly over literacy and knowledge production, right? So they didn't want to make it possible for everyone to read and write because that would reduce their power over the people, right? Does that make sense? Same thing with the compass. The compass would allow Chinese to explore the world and bring in new ideas and new goods. The bureaucrats didn't want that. They wanted to protect the social hierarchy. With gunpowder, yeah, it's fine, but the problem is if now everyone has a gun, they can revolt against you, right? Okay? So for China, it was much more important to maintain a social hierarchy than it is to innovate and to dominate the world. In fact, what's important for us to remember is that if you give governments a choice, they would always choose to maintain a social hierarchy rather than to innovate, because that's just the easiest thing to do. But, and this is important, Europe didn't have a choice in the matter. It was a matter of life and death. You either innovate or you will get destroyed by your neighbor. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay, so we did a broad overview of the history, and we'll go into very specific details over the next few weeks, okay? So next class will be on the Enlightenment, which will then give rise to the French Revolution and the American Revolution, okay? All right? So, but this is just a very broad overview. All right, so questions, guys? Yes?
So, is there like the Chinese bureaucracy want to keep the social hierarchy?
Yes.
And instead of being innovative, so and is there like Europe they didn't have a choice? Like why? Didn't they have like they had the royal families, they have the social classes, so they want to keep the social hierarchy.
Okay, so why did Europe innovate, right? Okay, great. So let's look at Europe. Let's just look at France, okay? Okay, so as a nation, you are under 2 types of pressure. External, okay? external just means Britain, Russia, Germany, Holy Roman Empire. Okay, you have a lot of enemies. Okay? And so you're competing against them. At the same time, this is really important. You have, internal pressure as well, okay? Because remember, what they're doing now is they're recruiting more and more people to join your army. And the general rule is that if people fight for you, if they die for you, they also have a say in your society, okay? Also, you need to get people to have children to replenish your population. You need to get them to work hard, okay? So you're always afraid of revolution, discontent, and also the idea of indifference, right? People don't care anymore. So you're under these two pressures. So because of these two pressures, it creates contradictions in your society. And these contradictions force you to balance these contradictions, which leads to innovation. Okay? Does that logic here make sense to you? Right? This creates conflict and contradiction, right? Which will then lead to innovation. And if you don't innovate, then you have a revolution or defeat. Okay? Does that make sense? If you don't innovate, your enemies will come and conquer you, or your people will rebel and overthrow you. Okay? Those are the two options. So you don't have a choice in the matter, but to innovate. But sometimes the innovation can't keep up with the social change. And that's what happened in the French Revolution, which we will discuss later on, is that, okay, the government was trying to make these changes, but you have too many social classes. The merchant class, the educated middle class, lawyers, basically. You have all these different social groups now who want a greater say in government, but then you have this hierarchy of like clergy, nobility, and bureaucrats who want to maintain their privileges. Okay? And if you can't resolve this conflict, then the only outcome is revolution. All right? So it's either you choose to resolve it or it will be resolved for you. Okay? So this is a process of constant innovation and revolution. Okay? Yeah?
So didn't China have the same problem? Didn't they have enemies, or, I mean, at the age they have revolutions? I mean, like, we always have, like, a region that have different dynasties.
Okay. All right. That's a great question. Okay. So why isn't this happening in China? Okay. All right. So the first thing about China, that's it from Europe, is that China for the longest time has been much more united. And there are natural boundaries that protect China, okay? So the sea, the mountains, the desert to the north, okay? So China has these natural boundaries that Europe doesn't have. So from the perspective of Chinese bureaucrats, they're not afraid of external enemies, okay? Because like Japan, Korea, they're not really threats to China at this time. They're more afraid of internal revolution, okay? So that's where the focus is on, like, how do we maintain internal coherence? And the best way to do that is by co-opting the local elite, by bribing the local elite. Okay? And the best way to bribe the local elite is by helping them stamp out local discontent, ensuring that the people that are most loyal to you are always in power in local areas. Okay? Does that make sense? So the example is this. The example is, think back to the Japanese invasion of China, okay, World War II. You look at the KMT, the Kuomintang, which is a dominant power in China. Japan is coming in, conquering most of China, controlling the industrial heartland. And what is Jiang Xueqin doing? Does he care about the Japanese? Not at all. He cares about the Communist Party. These peasants in these caves in northwest China. Why? The Japanese are a much greater military threat, but they are not a threat to the social hierarchy. You can work with the Japanese, right? The Japanese are perfectly willing to work with you to control China. The communists represent an overturning of the social hierarchy. Therefore, they are a much greater threat. Okay? Does that make sense? But that's a logic in China. Okay? Maintain the social hierarchy. If foreigners want to come and conquer China, that's fine because we can work with them to maintain the social hierarchy. Okay? But these peasant rebels are the real problem. Okay?
So, if China is already trying their best for stabilization, why our dynasty is still not lasting long? We're saying if they are only valued for a social hierarchy, but they are actually not mind that which emperor is exactly who it is.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. Okay. Why is it that Chinese dynasties don't last very long, right? Okay. So I know this is hard to understand, but what Chinese civilization is, it's a bureaucracy. Okay? The bureaucracy. Because the bureaucracy represents a social hierarchy. Okay? Confucianism. If the Confucian culture lives on, China lives on. So what's important is to protect the Confucian culture, which puts scholar officials, the bureaucrats, at the top of society. So you can have the Mongols, you can have the Japanese, you can have, I don't know, Zhu Yuanzhang, who cares? The emperor doesn't matter. You understand? The emperor doesn't really matter in the system. What matters is the bureaucracy. And that has been consistent for 2,000 years. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so the intention, the strategy is to maintain the bureaucracy, even though you may need to put in a foreign leader. Okay? In fact, you're better off with a foreign leader because the foreign leader is much more dependent on the bureaucracy than maybe a local leader.
So they actually don't care about who it is, the emperor, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. The emperor is just a figurehead. The emperor has no power, right? Because you think about it, the emperor is just one person. But the information that he gets is all from bureaucrats. And therefore, you can control and manipulate the emperor based on the information you provide him. Right? So it's a bureaucracy that has all the power. And that's why China doesn't innovate, because the bureaucracy is too powerful. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, great.